Greetings, welcome to the SciFi Pubcast, the podcast that tries to be a pub, and perhaps someday a pub that tries to be a podcast. As always, we are looking for customers to come visit our bar. So if you're passionate about something, you want to be on a podcast, well, let us know, because this bar is all about community. And if you want to help us out, please consider leaving a 5-star review wherever you find the show, joining our Discord server, and subscribing to our YouTube channel. I'm Joel. I'm the owner of the SciFi Pubcast, so to speak. And I'm looking around at the good old bar, and we have a full crew on today. In a special episode, we have Carrie Simpson, Derek Beebe, and Dr. Randal Graham, author of Beforelife and Afterlife Crisis. Hi, guys.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, yes. What a week. We were just doing some banter before the show and just describing or talking about the news in general, and I could really use a drink right now. But I'm drinking coffee. Oh, well. Yes. Let's see. Carrie, how's your day been?
Well, I've only been awake. Well, awake is a relative term. I've only been out of bed for about 2 hours. I got home about 2 o'clock this morning after a night of drinking and board games. So with, people who haven't seen other people for like a month. So we were all in our own bubble.
Fantastic.
Yeah. The words are hard. If I fall asleep while we're recording, this is why. It means the caffeine has worn off.
I wonder what's the science of hangovers. Someone should develop a cure to that. Yeah, I'll pay big bucks for that. Yeah, for sure. Derek, man, how's things in Pennsylvania? Talk to me.
Pretty good. I've been binging Patrick Troughton Doctor Who's. He was the second Doctor in the early 60s.
I love him.
Mid 60s. Yeah, I think I only ever saw
adorable.
one of his before now, and it's a shame that more don't survive because I really like him as the Doctor.
Interesting.
Yeah, Matt Smith had a bit of a Troughton quality to him on occasion. I was like, and I really loved that.
Yeah. Stephen Moffat always said that Troughton was kind of like the model for the 11th Doctor. Although Matt Smith is a lot more arrogant and pushy. Patrick Troughton was very kind of like down to earth and always pretended to be an idiot. He was very amusing.
Okay, guys, who do you think could be the next Doctor? Yeah, if they go with someone new next year.
I don't know.
I did see one article saying that the favorite right now is Richard Ayoade from IT Crowd.
Yeah, Richard Ayoade. He's
fantastic.
Ayoade,
yeah, he would be great. The other name I saw was, oh god, I'm blanking. I remember there was a woman that was a favorite to do it, and then they also said Michael Sheen. I wouldn't want Michael Sheen because he's been in everything. He's just kind of like too famous and recognizable.
I could almost see Michael Sheen doing it. If Michael Sheen got cast as the Doctor, they would really need to find a way to bring Tennant back just so they could do a whole, Good Omens staged joke about, and that would be awesome.
Yeah.
That'd work.
Yeah, sure.
I'd like to see Idris Elba as the Doctor.
Ooh, that'd be good. I like that.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Yeah, because he's too old to be James Bond at this point, but you can be old and play the Doctor.
Yeah. And he's British, so that'd be good. I like that. One of my favorite TV shows of all time is The Wire, and that was his big breakup performance, at least to Americans and Canadians. So, I'd be sick if that happens. And talking about jokes, so Derek, how's our kitchen doing here at the old pub?
The kitchen is never a joke, Joel. I put a lot of work into it.
Of course you do. Yeah, of course you do.
And I actually put a lot of extra effort into this week's dish. Since we're talking about scientists, I decided to make these little brain Jello molds. So I started with a green Jello mold, and I let it sit out for a few weeks until it, got the right color. And I also, like this kind of stuff requires hand-picked artistes. So I grew one fingernail out really long to do the carving, and I scraped off the mold from the top. And then with my fingernail, I did the individual little creases of the brain material. So now it's this lovely little gray brain that you can eat. So I think you should charge a little bit extra for this, because I really did put a lot of work into this. Like, I'm thinking like, $10 a pop or something like that. I don't want to feel like I'm wasting my time here.
I'll take that under consideration. Really?
I'm afraid. I'm very afraid.
Yeah. I have to get it past our lawyers first. That's how.
Yeah, it's going to require a waiver.
Okay.
Yeah. No kidding.
Well, the waiver is on the little coaster that it sits on. So by accepting it, you're basically accepting the waiver.
I don't think that's how waivers work.
Implied consent.
it's like being handed a summons. It's like you trick someone into taking hold of it.
I'm not a lawyer on the podcast. That's our two Canadian friends. I don't think that's how waivers work.
Yeah, I don't know. I think I just need another drink at this point. Okay. Randal, my friend.
Hello, sir.
How you doing? How's London, Ontario, and University of Western Ontario, Western University? How is that life going for you?
Oh, it's been a nice quiet week for everyone in North America, I think. Nothing much going on. Just time to reflect on the holidays and relax a little bit and watch Star Trek Insurrection for no reason at all. No, it's been... it's funny because I'm the only person here who has no claim to being American in any way. And I'm freaked out, right? Like, I'm up here living in London, Ontario, where nothing dangerous is going to happen anytime soon. And watching the goings-on this week has been terrifying. My thoughts are with you, my American friends, and all the American listeners in the podcast. And just hoping that cooler heads prevail and people are calm and happy in the lead up to the inauguration, and that everyone stays as safe as possible. And diverse their attention from anything scary by reading and watching lots of science fiction and listening to the podcast. So thank you for diverting my attention from CNN for at least an hour while we record this.
Yeah, it's been an unusual week in American politics and American culture. Yeah, it's...
Yes.
In some ways, it's more traumatic than, say, the American Civil War, right? In other ways, it's more traumatic than, say, the American Revolution or American War of Independence, because it's happening before our eyes, and it's in the present. It's not like the historic event where we're looking back with some sort of, understanding of what our perspective. This is just new, day by day. And
well, it was really crazy for me watching this, and wondering, like, thinking back to 1776, right? I remember it well. But thinking back to those days and thinking, you wonder how many people who are now regarded as revolutionaries and heroes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, you look at the cadre of people who were invading the Capitol completely unjustifiably this past week, and how many of them were sort of horrible, malignant actors, and how many were just drunken follower hangers-on. Right? Like, how many people were just like, I'm here for a good time and taking some selfies, not even thinking that they're contributing to evil or contributing to danger or the devolution of civil society.
Or that they might be held responsible for their actions.
Absolutely. Like, people just thinking this is just a media event. It's not an actual thing of consequence in world politics. And one wonders how history gets written the way it does. Oftentimes, Joel is more of an expert on that than I am, but it was really interesting to watch. Like, all of these people, like that QAnon shaman guy. Like, is he going to be in a history book someday? Like that? Like, how strange is that?
Yeah, he's going to be like a Thomas Paine type character. I thought I'd put more credit to Thomas Paine.
Yeah.
I
just love the memes of the signs were like, Q sent me, and then you have the John Delancey who's like, I most certainly did not.
Yes, that was a nice moment of levity in all of this, which we need as much as possible. And also, on behalf of Canada, guys, I can only apologize for Ted Cruz.
He was born in Calgary. That's the joke. Okay.
Yeah.
right?
We know.
Yeah.
We know.
The other thing is just to not totally get away from the political topic because it's so apparent in our faces right now, is that the role of big tech and how they actually relented after 4 years of crap or 5 years of crap. You know,
Yeah, it's about bloody time.
Big tech has taken a position, and freedom of speech versus, contractual rights. Yeah, welcome to reality of business dealings.
Well, freedom of speech doesn't mean freedom from consequences or disobeying the terms of service.
Yeah.
Well, and the interesting thing is people who are freaking out about freedom of speech forget that Twitter is the private actor here with freedom of speech. Right? Like it can't be compelled to host speech it doesn't like. Mm-hmm. Right? Like you can't force any American, including a corporation, to be a forum for speech it doesn't want. It's not a government actor. It's a legal person, and it's exercising its rights in the same way as the rest of y'all are.
You have to read the terms of service just like you have to read the fine print on the bottom of a coaster of a dish.
They actually go to law school. I love that. Okay. Yeah. But we're here not to talk about politics and legalities. We're here to talk about depictions of scientists in science fiction. Yes. What is science fiction without scientists? And this is
just fiction.
Just fiction. Exactly. Just fiction. Just storytelling. Really. Shut up, Lauren. Oh, God. So this is Randall's idea, and we've touched on science and science fiction before in past shows. But we had a big birthday just the other week. January 4th, 1643, a fellow by the name of Isaac Newton was born, who became Sir Isaac Newton. Yes, it's been 378 years since his birth in England. And he was a big deal. I know, Randall, you're quite fond of Sir Isaac Newton, right?
Oh, he has been a hero of mine forever and ever. And I also note, for those keeping track of birthdays, Joel is absolutely correct. January 4th, 1643. On the old Julian calendar, it's celebrated as December 25th, 1642. So it coincides with Christmas. So those of us who aren't of a particular religious bent sometimes celebrate Newtonmas instead of Christmas on December 25th. And so we did observe that day in my home, which was a load of fun. But yeah, I just love Isaac Newton. And one of my favorite depictions of Isaac Newton ever was in a show. I don't know if you remember it. It was on the Arts and Entertainment Network, which I don't even know if that still exists, but it was called Biography of the Millennium. They used to have a biography show that they had all the time. And it was the most important people of the last 2,000 years, right, from the year 0 to the year 2000. And when they got up, I was rooting for Isaac Newton to be number 1 the whole time because it was a countdown, right? And so we get up to number 3, who I think was like Darwin or someone. And then we get to number 2. And they said the person we're going to name as number 2 would be pissed off that he was the number 2 and not number 1. I'm like, oh God, it's Isaac Newton. And yeah, it was. Isaac Newton came second, and Johannes Gutenberg came first for inventing the printing press, which I thought was lame. But yeah, Isaac Newton, absolutely fantastic, super figure in science circles of all sorts, and also legal circles. People forget that he retired as a member of the House of Lords in the United Kingdom, and was only, I think, recorded once in the transcripts of the proceedings of the House of Lords saying anything on the floor of the House of Lords, and that was asking someone to close a window because there was a draft. So that's his contribution to the legal world. But yeah, I love him so much that, as you know, if you've read Before Life, Grink, that he was a secondary character in Before Life, serving as the personal secretary to the city solicitor, one of the heavies in the book. And then he comes back as the major antagonist in Afterlife Crisis. And yeah, huge fan. And I can only apologize for the way that he's dealt with in my books.
Oh, dear.
Oh, God.
Now, Randall, when you celebrate this Newton Mass holiday, what's the traditional dish? Is it just a big plate of fig Newtons?
Well, now that you mention it, I think we should change this to have some sort of gelatinous brain ordeal to eat.
Yes.
I think that makes much more sense. And
copyright BB.
One of the most famous brains. It should actually be just a fallen apple.
Yeah. I definitely need to drink more vodka right now. Yeah. This is great because, yeah, Sir Isaac Newton, and I think he's been with us, the whole gravity business thing, all that good stuff. He's definitely has influenced other scientists throughout the history of science, as well as novelists like our own Randal Graham, right, who loves experimenting with him. And Randal, I believe you have a special treat for us in honor of Sir Isaac Newton. Is that correct?
I do, and it's the weirdest thing that was inspired by a weird dream I have, because as you guys know, when you're not around, I dream about you. And so I was actually dreaming about the podcast, and I dreamt that the thing that's about to happen happened. And so I texted Joel and said, "Hey, Joel, I had this dream." And Joel said, "Let's do it." And what that was this. As I just mentioned a moment ago, Isaac Newton is the sort of major antagonist in Afterlife Crisis. And one of the major plot points is that at the end of Before Life, there's a little epilogue indicating that Isaac Newton is the most dangerous man in the afterlife, and that he's doing something that has the possibility of unraveling the entire threads of the afterlife and ruining everything for everyone. And we don't really know what that is. And the hero of Afterlife Crisis, Rinnick Feynman, is sent off on a task to stop him from what he's doing. And so in Afterlife Crisis, we meet up with Rinnick Feynman, who heads off to hobnob with Isaac Newton and find out what he's up to, and doesn't seem to think that Isaac Newton is doing anything in particular that's bad or that poses a threat for Detroit. And so there's this whole scene where the two of them meet, and Isaac Newton starts chatting with Rinnick Feynman and realizing that Rinnick Feynman is sensing some of the things that Isaac Newton is doing. Changes are being made to history retroactively in the afterlife, and Rinnick seems to be the only one who can perceive them. And Isaac Newton wants his help in dealing to some extent with this phenomenon. And so there's an audiobook to Afterlife Crisis. And I mentioned to Joel that the actor who reads the audiobook, a fellow named Raoul Bhaneja, does an excellent job. And I said, why don't we get Raoul to hop on the podcast with us and do a scene of Isaac Newton meeting up with Rinnick Feynman, sort of laying out the major plot point of Afterlife Crisis, where Isaac reveals his terrible plan and Rinnick reacts to it in the way that only Rinnick would. And Joel said, that's great. And so I texted Raoul, and Raoul did a 16-minute recording from the relevant portion of Afterlife Crisis. And I listened to it, and I loved it, and I was super happy. And this is all, it's not directly lifted from the audiobook. He did his own separate live recording, and there's visuals associated with it and all that sort of thing, which will be added into the video version of the podcast. And we looked at it. We found a 6-minute segment that we thought was good for the podcast. And Joel has agreed to air that here today. And I can only say thank you to Joel for hosting this, and to Raoul for supplying this bit of his material.
It's a great honor. I'm so ecstatic about this because this is great. We're putting out content. It's important stuff. It's literary. And Raoul, he's just not an unnamed actor. He's been around. What's his background, Randal? I believe he's graduate of the National Theatre School of Canada.
Yeah, he's quite a noted actor. I'm a big fan. I couldn't believe it when we got him to do the audiobook. I didn't know who he was because they didn't give me names. They just gave me recordings, like actors 1 through 4 on the auditions, and they had recorded auditions on their phone. And it's funny, they were each given a page of Afterlife Crisis, the actors auditioning to do the audiobook. And they were given no context, and it was one page, and it was a page from the book that I must admit was not particularly funny. And so they weren't told that it was a comedy. They weren't told that it was supposed to be light and humorous. And so all 4 of them sort of read it like it was a funeral dirge. It was like they were reading obituaries or something. And it was like this dark and deep approach to my... And I'm like, no, this is totally wrong. And it was all in American accents. And so I wrote back to the publisher and I said, could you please tell them 2 things? Tell them, thing 1, it's comedy. Thing 2, the narrator has a British accent. And Raoul, although he's Canadian, his native accent is British. He has a British accent, or he was born with one and can do a whole array of different British accents. He's a fantastic actor. He's been in all sorts of things. And one of the things that sold him for me is that the very first chapter of Afterlife Crisis features a lot of dialogue with a porter named William, who you eventually figure out is William Shakespeare. And all of the dialogue that William utters throughout the book is drawn either directly from Macbeth or from Hamlet. And Raoul's one of his biggest claim to fame is he did a one-man show version of Hamlet that is absolutely fantastic. Raoul's a great actor, massively trained, as Joel points out. He's been in Grey's Anatomy. He had a recurring role in Titans. He's a jazz and blues singer. He's got a massive CV. I recommend him to anyone listening to go off and check him out on IMDb and check out his various works. And also just a heck of a lovely guy. I don't know how he managed to capture the voices in my head when he did the recording for Afterlife Crisis, but he really did, and took a minimum of direction. He would text me and ask me. He had a director working with him, a wonderful director named Brandley Charkow, and they would text me and say, what tips do you have for Chapter 4? And I said, look, do what you want. You guys know what you're doing. I wrote a book. I don't know how audiobooks work. Go do it and have fun. And occasionally, some weird pronunciations or legal language that crept in, I would help them with. But by and large, they did their own thing. And I was just blown away by the performances. And so that's Raoul, and hell of a guy who was happy to participate in today's podcast. So again, thanks to him, thanks to Joel for hosting this, and thanks to the rest of my podcast teammates here for indulging me in this bit of silliness.
This is fantastic, Randall, like I said. Well, let's play it, and then let's talk about it afterwards, okay? Sounds like
great.
a plan? Okay.
Yeah.
It's the most ambitious experiment anyone has ever conceived, he said, as though reading from a grant application. What I propose, Mr. Feynman, is nothing short of universal readjustment. The wholesale reweaving of the fabric of Detroit. Golly, I said. I've seen beyond the veil, he continued, in a rapturous sort of way. When he spoke again, his voice was husky with emotion. With your help, I'll achieve my goal of changing Detroit at the quantum level. My ears perked up. I sat up straighter. What he had said had set my glial cells aflame. The quantum level, you say? Your goal, all of this work you're pursuing, is aimed at changing Detroit at the quantum level? It is, he said. This great experiment, this reweaving of which you speak, you mean to tell me your efforts are focused exclusively on quantum whatnots, those thingamies that whiz around unseen inside everything, but which can't be detected without several thousand quid worth of government-funded lab equipment? Well, yes, said Isaac, looking at me as though I'd lost a marble or two. What this chump didn't realize was that he'd underestimated the suave and debonair guest before him, and that I was hep to his science jargon. I read all about this quantum business in the fairly recent past, having discovered the May edition of Popular Science in my powder room at the Hôtel de la Lune. I perused an article on quantum thingamies for the space of at least 15 minutes before concluding that the title Popular Science had been intentionally ironic. So, I said, preparing to demonstrate the fruits of my encounter with this Popular Science rag, your attention is directed solely at quarks, bosons, gluons, and what have you? Precisely, said Isaac. The key to my plan lies in adjusting reality at the subatomic level, manipulating the eigenvalues of elementary particles and their constituents. And by subatomic, I said, just to ensure I'd collared the gist, you mean, in fact, smaller than atoms. This reweaving you describe, your experiments, all of your fiddling with the fabric of Detroit, it is focused entirely on messing about with the subatomic thingamies? Absolutely, said he. So, just teeny tiny things then? I suppose so, but Your efforts are confined to the realm of the infinitesimally small, the teensy-weensy, the I can't even see the bally things without a couple of highly powered microscopes level. Yes, said Isaac, a touch defensively. But when I implement these quantum-level changes, I've heard enough, I said, waving a dismissive teacup, for I had, in fact, heard enough. And, as you might imagine, my relief at what I'd heard was stupendous. It's not going too far to say that the only circumstance that I was sitting in a chair kept me from dancing a carefree step. This officious number cruncher was, as Abe had foreshadowed, tugging at the very thread that formed the fabric of Detroit. But he was doing so on such a minute scale that it didn't matter a single damn. The quantum level, I mean to say. If he wanted to poke around with subatomic doodads, snapping a lepton here and a gluon there, then who was I to stand in this chump's way? Carry on, Newton, I might have said, and may Abe speed your efforts. For now I saw that Abe had gotten things all wrong. He could be forgiven for this, of course, not being privy to the hot news I'd uncovered. Abe must have heard that Isaac was, to use the fellow's own impassioned hyperbolic lingo, mucking about with the very fabric of the universe, or shaking Detroit to its very foundations. But what Abe failed to realize was the laughably small scale of Isaac's fiddling. This science fancier was no cloven-hoofed terrorizer of the innocent, but merely a peevish nerd, intent on fiddling with infinitesimally teensy-weensy things which even the meanest intellect could perceive would be of no consequence to anyone. I knew in a heartbeat this was one of those misunderstandings you often get, those laughable cases where one half of the world doesn't know what the other three-quarters is up to. The quantum level. That's all it was. An amoeba might take note of Isaac's experiments, but nothing but an amoeba, and even then only an amoeba with a magnifying glass. Now that the scales had fallen from mine eyes, as the expression is, I realized Isaac wasn't a danger to anyone at all, with the possible exception of undergraduate students who messed up their long division. He certainly wasn't a candidate for the office of most dangerous chump in the world. Let him tinker with his quantum thingamies, and I hope he has a fine day for it. I breathed a heartfelt sigh of relief.
And what a clip! I love this. What did you guys think?
It was good. It was good. So Finnick thinking that quantum, minuscule, particles can have no effect on the universe whatsoever. Okay, butterfly effect, anyone?
Thank you for noticing. That was the core idea for the whole book. I thought Rinnick, being this goofy literary character guy, whose identity we don't really clue into until sort of the end of Afterlife Crisis, he wouldn't get this. He's not science-y, as Matt Smith would put it, as the Doctor. He doesn't think about science. And so when he finds out that Isaac wants to change reality on a quantum level, that's why he concludes, well, who cares? Maybe an amoeba would notice, but only an amoeba with a magnifying glass. Because, teeny tiny things, who cares about that stuff? And that was actually the core idea that led to the whole book, and which is why I wanted Raoul to do that little clip. And I had fun playing with the idea of Isaac Newton just hating the fact that the afterlife doesn't correspond to empirical observation, and Rinnick not giving a hoot. Raoul really caught the silliness of that, and I'm very grateful to him for that.
Well, also, Riddick clearly has never heard Les Miserables, or specifically my favorite song from Les Mis, called Little People.
Oh yeah,
No?
nice. No, he was dead before that. That's the
Oh,
thing.
yeah, obviously.
He's been tucked away in the afterlife all that time.
Oh yeah. So empiricalism, right? So we need to observe through our senses things so that we know they're consistent and true, and it has to be verified by multiple sources. That's the scientific method.
Fake news.
Fake news. Yeah, imagine that. Oh God. Why is it? Let me ask you this: in fiction, why is it always a mad scientist type? The only two franchises I think that may have some good, scientist types are Star Trek, because you have the scientist types and you have, of course, the science officers attached to each starship. And there's some cases of good scientists in The Expanse. But in both Star Trek and The Expanse, there's some like mad scientists, there's some evil scientists. I think science is more like morally neutral. What do you guys make of it?
That's my absolute favorite thing about the whole series, the arc of Doctor Who, is that here we have, there are lots of different iterations of the Doctor, obviously, and I'm not fully up to date, I have to admit. I haven't seen the last two Doctors yet.
They're so
I know,
good.
and I'm told that they're fantastic, and I can only apologize for not having been up to date with that. But like Matt Smith's Doctor, for example, everything was resolved by scientific inquiry, right? Everything was by some sort of engineering hack or science hack, just being inquisitive and applying the scientific method rather than blowing people up. Like his weapon is a scientific tool. It's not a blaster, right? He's got a screwdriver. And he likes to fix stuff. And it's this scientific approach that flies in the face of all of the mad scientist stuff that we may or may not be able to trace all the way back to Mary Shelley. And the notion that science will and human curiosity will kill us all. And Doctor Who brings back the notion that, no, science also can save us all. And instead of just exploding each other, every which way. So I love that about the Doctor.
Agreed. And I think there's, I don't know, I think, science without some kind of moral compass, that's when people get into trouble. It's just like, you could be all for science and want to like discover and try to do things to help humanity and stuff like that, but the minute you like if a sociopath were trying to invent things, he wouldn't be necessarily caring about what impact this would have on the universe in general. He'd just be doing it because he can. Mm-hmm. It kind of goes back to the conversation from the first Jurassic Park. Just because you can do something doesn't mean you should.
Absolutely. And I think that the modern sort of mad scientist in literature is the equivalent for the evil wizard, right? Like science is the magic of science fiction. And you have good guys doing it, you have bad guys doing it. For every Dr. Frankenstein, there's a Tony Stark. Mm-hmm. And there's a Doc Brown trying to use science for good, trying to use science for evil. And so you have evil wizards, you have good wizards. And for us, the non-scientifically trained public, well, I can't speak for everyone on the podcast, but I myself only have undergraduate level science training. We look at this and it follows that law that, a sufficiently advanced level of science is indistinguishable from magic. Mm-hmm. And so those are the wizards of some genres of modern literature. And so you have good ones, you have bad ones, and the bad ones are scary because they wield a power, a form of magic that we don't get. And we don't know what they're going to do that's going to harm us all.
Yeah.
There's also the fact that traditionally, scientist types, especially mad scientists, why is there always, older white men, right? It's only very recently, by which I mean the last decade or two, where you see more diverse characterizations of scientists, especially scientists who are good guys, who are doing science for positive values as opposed to just for knowledge is power, that type of value.
Because until recently, all fiction was just about old white people.
And that's
fair.
That's fair. But I think it's more than that, right? Because I go back to The Expanse, and I know Randall is at a disadvantage because he hasn't seen the different seasons of it, right? But there's characters in that who are from diverse backgrounds who are trying to solve real world problems like hunger or like modifications caused through a plot point using science to solve issues. And of course, the same series has scientists who are trying to, do the Joseph Mengele routine just to gain power.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's frightening. Oh.
Yeah, that's actually a really good, interesting reflection. I mean, and then we see it being turned on its head in the modern era, right? Like, probably my favorite example of diversity in science and it being used for good was probably Shuri from Wakanda.
Yes.
Here we have a black female who is the lead scientific genius in Wakanda, saving the world from destruction.
Yeah. Whereas in Expanse, the good guys, of course, is Prax and then Dr. Elvie Okoye. So,
yeah.
Okay. And of course, the bad scientists are Dr. Lawrence Strickland and Paleo Cortez, help me out. Cortazar, there he goes. Yeah. Yes, me with my speech impediment. I apologize for that. It's interesting. And then you look at, say, Star Trek, right? Like, I'm a classic Star Trek guy. My favorite Star Trek movie is The Wrath of Khan. The whole Genesis project, let's turn dead moons and dead worlds into life and living things. So you have Dr. Carol Marcus and, of course, her son David Marcus. And, this is great. Let's just reimagine a dead world to a living world, but it can also be used as a weapon of mass destruction.
Well, and also, I mean, even then, even a scientist with the best intentions can, cheat, and that cheating can, have dangerous side effects. See Star Trek 3.
I love that point, Carrie, that, even the good scientist can do evil by using protomatter in the Matrix, right? By taking a shortcut that is, not careful, slow, empirical advancement of science in the way it's supposed to proceed, but by saying, I found a way in my own self-interest to make this work as quickly as possible so I can get credit for the discovery.
Right.
And that can be its own sort of evil.
Yeah, and as my teacher, likes to say, there are no shortcuts. Mm-hmm. So.
Yeah, and then there's, of course, the scientists who are doing their craft or their trade because they have no choice, right? Look at Star Wars, Galen Erso from Rogue One. Mm-hmm. All right?
Oh, yeah.
So this idea of keeping the smart scientist types enslaved and make sure they do their research and development because we need the weapon or we need the results now.
That reminds me very much of the most recent iteration of the sort of trapped scientist trope that we saw in the last couple episodes of Star Trek Discovery this season, Aurelio, Kenneth Mitchell. I have massive affection for Kenneth Mitchell. Let me state my bias up front. As our listeners will know, he played Cole and Cole Shaw and Tanavik in the first two seasons of Star Trek Discovery. And then he was he was diagnosed with ALS. He's got Lou Gehrig's disease. And he was on the first of the Star Trek cruises that I went on with us. And he was, partying and dancing among us and incredibly physically active, playing tennis against Jason Isaacs. I mean, he was just a huge force on that cruise. And then we show up for the next one and he's in a wheelchair. Mm-hmm. And none of us knew. He had just announced it days before. And I hadn't caught on to that until he appeared before us. And he was the heart of that whole cruise. He crowd surfed around us. Like he couldn't walk himself, but we crowd surfed him around on the dance floor. And he's just a lovely guy. A friend of mine went to high school with him. He's Canadian and just the nicest guy. has read Before Life, so drink, cheers. I gave him a copy from chatting with him about our mutual friend. But yeah, he plays Aurelio in the most recent series, most recent season of Discovery, who is a scientist with some sort of genetic disorder that keeps him in the modern equivalent of a wheelchair, sort of a hover chair. And he's working for the Orion Syndicate, having been misled to believe that they are in some way a force for good. And sadly, we don't have much of a character arc for him. It's a very brief sort of switch from the bad side to maybe possibly useful on the good side. But yeah, that's, as Joel points out, that's a common trope in sci-fi, where we have this scientist who's just working for some greater global machinery, some administration where he or she isn't sure of the morals of what they're doing. Well,
I mean, you could also go back to like the EU in Star Wars, and there was the scientists who were working on stuff like the Death Star and the Sun Crusher and stuff like that, who thought they were just doing stuff because to advance science. They didn't realize that they were using that the Empire was using their weapons for mass galactic destruction, even though they had very obvious names.
Yeah, I think they thought the Death Star was just a mining laser. That's what the Imperials told them they were building.
We just call it the Death Star. Yeah. Call it the Death Star because it sounds cool. But yeah, well, I mean, famously Oppenheimer, right, on realizing the destructive force that he unleashed, now I'm become death, he quoted from the Bhagavad Gita, and realized the possible perilous implications. I mean, he knew all along, but then seeing them in front of himself, realized the terror that he could unleash on the world. When we're talking about real scientists, I don't mean to derail this too much, but I have to pause for a second. We're talking about scientists in science fiction, and I want to acknowledge, if I may, two people. And that is Dr. Aaron McDonald and Dr. Mohammed Noor, who are both actual science consultants on the Star Trek series. Aaron McDonald is a PhD in astrophysics, and she's a consultant on current Star Trek series. She just started doing that in 2019, as well as a bunch of other sci-fi programs. And she gives fantastic talks on the Star Trek cruises. She's hilarious. I've met her a couple of times and have a couple of selfies with her because I'm a huge fanboy. And she famously gave a speech on how going beyond Warp 10 just does terrible things, and never do it, please. It turns Tom Paris and Catherine Janeway into lizards and makes them mate and all kinds of horrible things. But she is fantastic, and I'm doing her a complete disservice by summarizing her career by saying Star Trek consultant. I mean, she's so much more than that. She's fantastic. Same goes for Mohammed Noor, who has a PhD in ecology and evolution, who deals with genetics and biology at Duke. And he's a consultant on Star Trek properties and also comes on the cruises. So I think we would be remiss and forgetting all of the real science that goes into science fiction, right? Like oftentimes the folks like, me and Derek, who are sitting at our typewriters or computers banging out some fiction. Sometimes when it comes to be digested by the real world, we need science consultants. And these people come in and say, okay, yeah, we can make your work make sense. And so some of these people with massive training, like Aaron and Mohammed, come out and do that. And they're just fabulous people. And they're committed to the same fandom that we are. And they're using their massive throbbing brains for good. And I love them for that. So shout out to those guys.
Well, I mean, Neil deGrasse Tyson got to be featured in a Superman comic, pointing out where Krypton was or could be seen from Earth, and they consulted with him like, okay, what are the properties of this star? And he basically found the approximate star could be in the DC universe, in the real universe, and said, okay, it's this one.
That is so cool.
And that made it into the comic.
That's amazing. I think it's telling that I can't think of a good scientist in Star Wars. I could be wrong, but no one pops up, right? They're either neutral or they're evil, like Dr. Pershing from The Mandalorian. But in Star Trek, we have science officers attached to each starship. And I think that's great, right? That's just a compare and contrast. Whereas, yeah, Randall just cited that Star Trek has scientists as consultants, whereas of course Star Wars it's space opera. Starships blow up in space, right? There's fireballs in space. It happens. Well, at least in fiction.
Yeah, I'm trying to think now of good scientists in Star Wars. That's an excellent point.
I mean, Galen Erso is basically a good guy. He was just made to do bad things.
Yeah, I mean, the Kaminoan cloners, well, I guess they're a bad example because they didn't really look at their clones as being human beings. They were
property.
Yeah.
And then the I will always hate the guy who's experimenting on Grogu.
Yeah.
Because Grogu is so damn cute. Don't hurt him.
I know.
Dr. Pershing was clearly kind of being held against his will, though.
You think?
Yeah, because he was like, they're not supposed to harm the baby. They're not supposed to kill the baby.
Yeah, but it's because he wants more blood, more DNA from the baby?
Yeah, maybe.
Yeah, it's self-serving, isn't it? Maybe. Yeah.
I don't know. All of his appearances, he just looked utterly terrified, but that's also because whenever he appeared, he was being held captive by Mando, so...
Yeah, there's that. But there's lots of other examples of scientists in science fiction. Avatar. Derek, you're a big Avatar fan, right? Grace Augustine, right? A very powerful woman scientist who's doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah, she was very caring, compassionate about the Na'vi. She smoked cigarettes, but nobody's perfect. But she was a good example of a good scientist.
Yeah. I think we need more good, positive scientist types in science fiction. The problem is, scientists, they're great for villains. They're great as a plot device, right? To further the plot along, because people can understand their motive. Their motive is knowledge-based. They want to be the wizards. They want power through science. I think that's fitting with Randall's comment earlier in the show about scientists being today's wizards, at least in fiction.
Well, I think there's so many evil scientists in science fiction because basically in order to have a story, you need to have some kind of a threat. And in science fiction, that usually means some kind of new concept being introduced that is a danger to someone. And you basically either have the option of an external threat, like an alien invasion from outside, or an internal threat from within. And that would, usually translate to someone inventing something or discovering something or making something that will be dangerous. Hence, evil scientist.
Yeah, and we have Dr. Evil, right? That's a bit on the nose, but still.
Well, it's really interesting as in that we treat intelligence as something to be suspicious of, right? Right, like for every Dr. McCoy, Dr. Hank McCoy in the Beast in Marvel and Professor X, we have a Dr. Doom. Right, like if you get good enough at science, you're either going to imperil the whole world or save it. We're not sure which.
Well, not to pull us back to real world conversation, but that has been kind of like the mindset of a certain segment of the populations. Like the elites, the educated elites are they just want they are the evil ones because they're trying to oppress us with all this knowledge and stuff. And if I wanted to know something, then people will tell me. Like, that's not how things work. That's not how.
And absolutely. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that was kind of my point.
Yeah, I love the depiction of scientists as morally neutral tools who end up getting used by whatever administration they find themselves affiliated with. Right, like sometimes they're just shown that even though they're like super geniuses, they're the dupes of an evil or a good administration. And I'm just scrolling through the show notes. This is a complete non sequitur, but I'm loving Joel right now for including Dr. Bunsen Honeydew in the list of scientists. That is fantastic.
And Beaker. Don't forget Beaker.
And Beaker.
Well, I mean, Bunsen and Beaker, if you guys have watched Muppets Now, their whole thing is, let's blow things up in the name of science. And yeah, that's awesome.
That's very Pinky and the Brain.
Is Pinky in the Brain in the show notes? I didn't get that far.
No,
it popped into
it's
my head.
only a selection.
Joel.
There's like dozens and dozens of names on this list. We're not going to go through the entire list. Okay, it's not a list show.
That's true. But yeah, it's like, you know. Yeah, I mean, like, yeah, in a way, it's kind of terrifying. The whole idea of blowing stuff up in the name of science is terrifying, but when you're, you know, when Bunsen and Beaker do it, it's entertaining. It's just like, yes, I want to see more of this.
Oh, God.
And poor Beaker.
You know, if I was trapped on a desert island with a few people, I would like to have a scientist there who would know things, you know, so just to keep me alive.
Like Roy Hinckley.
Yeah, exactly, from Gillian's Island, yes. Hey, let me ask you. Oh, go ahead.
I used to win trivia competitions all the time by being able to name, you know, Roy Hinckley was the professor and Jonas Grumby was the skipper. So I'm very glad to see that Joel has included the full name, Roy Hinckley.
But although I don't know how good of a scientist he was, I mean, he could get them off the island.
No.
Yeah, fair enough. He could make a telecommunication system out of coconuts, though.
That didn't work.
Yeah, fair.
Yeah, that was a bit nuts.
Nice.
Talking about scientists in fiction, at least. God, I must admit, like, when people come up with the names of these scientists, especially when we're looking at parody or comedy, these names are great. You know, like Bunsen, Honeydew, Beaker, Dr. Zoidberg, you know. Oh, Dr. Frank from The Simpsons. Like
Dr. Frankenfurter.
Dr. Frank. Yeah, exactly. Rock Horror Picture Show. Like, even things like, this is so common knowledge. Like, if you're a kid watching cartoons, say Despicable Me, right? Okay. Dr. Nefario, Phileas Groot. Okay, these are great names.
Yeah.
You know, or stereotypical, like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. Who developed this shrinking mechanism? You know, Professor Wayne Zelensky, right? It's you have this Eastern European entry into it as a name. Oh, that's great. Dr. Strangeglove.
It's interesting how scientists' names too sometimes enter the vernacular as being symbols of the thing that they are, right? Like if we say that someone is like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, we know that we're saying they're a person, you know, with two sides to them, right? Who lets their evil run wild. And I was looking over the show notes and I saw Captain Nemo listed, I saw Dr. Jekyll listed, and I can't help but point out that The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen is such an underrated movie.
Yes,
I know.
The comic book is way better.
Oh, is it? I haven't seen the comic book, but I've watched the movie like 5 times. I think that movie needs more love.
Yeah.
Agreed. But and speaking of, and I was actually going to bring that up earlier when we were talking about scientists being held against their will, because that's part of the driving force of the movie is like they're like Moriarty's, you know, kidnapping scientists and forcing them to work.
Yeah. There's also Journey to the Center of the Earth, based off the Jules Verne's novel, which is still on Disney Plus. Came out in the 50s. I just watched that last week, and you have scientists competing against each other, even committing murder, just to be the first one or the second one to just make this great discovery, scientific discovery, by journeying to the center of the Earth. So you have no values besides being the person to publish the results, to be the first person and win all the awards.
Publisher perish.
Yeah, when I was a kid, that was one of the first movies I ever loved. It was on like movie for a Sunday afternoon. I came home one day on a Sunday after Sunday school or whatever I was doing in the morning, and saw that in the afternoon. And they travel down through caverns to the center of the Earth and encounter like giant ants and other crazy creatures. And it was one of the first sort of fantasy fiction / science fiction movies I ever saw as a little kid, and a love for science fiction was born. What a fantastic movie!
Yeah.
Does it hold up? I haven't seen it in years.
It does. It's dated, but it's definitely vintage from that Disney time slot. The main character is Sir Oliver S. Lynbrook, and it opens, of all places, Edinburgh Castle, with a drum pipe corps marching down the hill. Interesting. It's good. And let's see. It's also, what is it with spaceships and scientists going mad, right? So you have Dr. Hans Reinhardt from The Black Hole, right? And what is it with scientists with beards? I need to grow my beard long.
I recently rewatched The Black Hole, and I'm going to say it does hold up. I loved it as a kid. I loved it again, like about 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Maximilian was terrifying when I was 6.
Yeah, the graphics were surprisingly good looking. That was one of the first things I watched when I got Disney Plus.
Yeah. And another scientist with a beard, Dr. Hans Zerkoff from Flash Gordon. We did a Flash Gordon episode, 2 years ago or something like that? Still a great movie.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, Carrie didn't particularly enjoy it, but yeah.
I have no idea what you guys made me watch.
But there's a long line of lineage in terms of fiction and the scientist types. Some of the very first movies ever to hit the cinema was based on science fiction. Metropolis. Am I saying this right? The one that's
Metropolis. Yeah.
The one scientist who created this totem basically is Rotwang, right? So there's a lot of Eastern European or German stuff coming through. You can even argue the cabinet of Dr. Caligari. Well, that's kind of like a scientist, right? More like a psychologist, but still, it's neat. And of course, we talk about Frankenstein and even like Professor Moriarty from Sherlock Holmes. It's been with us for hundreds of years, 150 years.
In the early portion, sort of the Tiger King era of the pandemic, one of the first things I did for entertainment wasn't watching Tiger King. I haven't seen that yet, but was I forget what theater company it was, but it released the stage play version of Frankenstein featuring Benedict Cumberbatch and Johnny Lee Miller.
Oh wow!
I don't know if you guys
both versions.
Yeah, both versions because they
switch off. Yeah,
that's right. In one version, Benedict plays the monster and Johnny Lee Miller plays Dr. Frankenstein, and then they swap roles on the next day. And both versions are available free to watch on YouTube, and it is brilliant. I slightly prefer Benedict as the monster, but it is absolutely brilliant. I literally weeping watching this, thinking how good it was, how true it was to the original. And I absolutely loved it. It was early on in the pandemic. And then it reminds me of one of my favorite memes related to science fiction that I've ever seen. And it's a quote along the lines of, intelligence is realizing that Frankenstein isn't the monster. Wisdom is realizing that Frankenstein is the monster.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. I recommend that the Benedict Cumberbatch Johnny Lee Miller version to anyone who hasn't seen it yet. It is an afternoon well spent.
Nice.
I think I might try to do some scientific experiments on me so I can build up some superpowers. Maybe I can turn myself invisible.
Oh dear.
Yeah, maybe something like that. But we'll see. Yeah, because of course we followed through the scientists, depiction of scientists, and often it's the case the scientists will start to conduct experiments on themselves, right? Because they don't have a lab rat, or they have an ethics committee that they can't pass their experiment past. And you see that in The Fly, right? Yeah, it still bugs me to this day, but still,
Nice.
So this is, different plot points and there's tropes.
Yeah.
So Jeff Goldblum plays all the scientists.
And mathematicians, yes. Yeah.
And mathematicians, chaoticians, yeah.
And cable repair technicians.
That's true. Oh, right. What's the name of the doctor from Independence Day?
Okun?
Yes.
Brackish Okun, which is a
a
great name.
Yeah, talking about names. Played by, of course, Brent Spiner, right? So
yes.
So it's so funny watching him play a different type of scientist. Hey.
He was a mad scientist, but a nice one. He didn't hurt anybody.
I have an embarrassing admission to make as the resident, one of the resident Trekkies in this podcast. The first time I saw the Star Trek episode, the Next Generation episode, Brothers, which is the one where Data gets summoned back to Soong's lab, and Laura comes back as well, and they finally meet Noonie and Soong. It wasn't until that episode was like 5 minutes from the end of the episode that I realized that Noonien Soong was also played by Brent Spiner.
All of the Sun Boys have been played by Brent Spiner.
Yeah, I didn't realize it.
Going back to Enterprise.
I'm like, oh my gosh, that's him. And like, I just thought it was some old dude in bad makeup, and then I realized, no, it's Brent Spiner in amazing makeup. I did not catch that until the very end. I'm like, well, okay, now that makes sense.
And we would be remiss if we didn't mention Zefram Cochrane. Yeah, the whole, First Contact, that's important stuff, right, in Star Trek lore.
Invention of warp drive.
Yeah. Amazing. Guys, do you consider people like Seven of Nine and Michael Burnheim to be scientist types? Because they were in the role of science officer, but does that really make them scientists? Like, is there a line there?
Michael Burnham was a scientist.
Yeah, I think on Star Trek, technically everybody is a scientist.
Well, yeah, Michael.
Unless they're in security,
Michael Burnham's a xenoanthropologist who also has degrees in advanced astrophysics and other sciences. And Seven of Nine has access to pretty much the sum of human knowledge and many, many other species as well.
Right.
But by current standards, you guys are right. Like, every member of Bridge Crew is some sort of scientist. And if Bill Nye has taught us anything, he used to do these features called Way Cool Scientist, and it would be people who were like engineers or technicians of some sort, anyone who used the scientific method in their work to promote the well-being of others, like meteorologists, like anybody who did anything. Like, you can get a doctorate in juridical science. I know, because I have one. And these are degrees that you can loosely call science degrees, but they're about using the scientific method to advance human knowledge and to try to help other people. And Bill Nye was big on making a big tent of who counts as a scientist. So he would certainly count Seven of Nine and T'Pol and Jadzia Dax and all the science officers. Why are they all attractive young women, now that I think about it? But
there's also Spock.
Spock, Brent Spiner. All these guys are scientists within the Bill Nye definition. And who am I to argue with him? He is the science guy.
Yeah. And if I remember right, Bill Nye doesn't have a PhD.
He does not. He's a materials engineer, I think.
Yeah, he's an engineer of some type, and I think he only did a master's because he got into science communications because he was doing stand-up, and he was looking for material, and it took off, and got him his first show. And there you go. No joke. And of course, he's the CEO of the Planetary Society, and I'm a member of the Planetary Society, so that's good
very
stuff.
Cool.
Yeah,
Cool.
I joined the Planetary Society the day after the 2016 U.S. presidential election. People are really upset, and I think the only way we can fight against certain aspects of politics is through knowledge and education.
Agreed.
As a long-term strategy. So that's
well said, sir.
That's my take on it, and let's see if it works. Anything else, guys? I know scientists are always used in horror movies as the bad guys. We see that in Frankenstein. Horror's not really my genre nowadays, but every bad horror movie out there, either it's going to be demons, it's going to be ghosts, or it's going to be a mad scientist type, like Centipede,
or someone's mother.
Oh, there's that. Yeah.
Or a reality star turned politician. Oh wait, that's not fiction. That's real life.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out which one of those Freddy Krueger fits into.
Yeah. Sleep on that for a bit.
No.
But then it's like things. Look up. There's other people we can mention, right? The guy from Ghostbusters, Dr. Egon Spengler, right? That's kind of cool. That fits into the horror genre somewhat.
Venkman and what?
Venkman.
What was Danny Aykroyd's character's name? They were all doctors. The only one that wasn't a doctor was
Winston.
Was Winston.
Right. There's that. Even the X-Files, Dr. Dana Scully. She was a medical doctor, right? Mm-hmm. So there's that.
Yeah.
Love doing autopsies.
Going deep into the show notes, I loved Joel's reference to Eleanor Arroway from Contact, Jodie Foster's character. That's one of my favorite sci-fi scientists of all time.
Yeah. it's the pursuit of knowledge for knowledge's sake, right? And there's a curiosity there deep down inside, and poses the question, like, what motivates people to study science and become scientists in real life and in fiction? I think one is this curiosity, and they want to learn more about the world, and they want to improve the lot of humanity in many ways. And some people don't, because you see all the time where scientists will lie in published journals, and then they have to recant afterwards when they are exposed for frauds. As fraudsters. So ego, and then there's money issues, because scientists do not get paid very much.
Yeah.
And it's hard to keep a full-time job down. I also like Marca Whitney from The Martian. That's an excellent one, right? So, yeah, science the shit out of it.
I love that one of his main motivations was coming up with a plan that allowed him to fly through space like Iron Man.
Yeah, exactly.
That was one of my favorite moments in that movie.
All right. And of course, I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with this, the Foundation series.
I read it as a kid. I need to read it again.
Right. It's going to be coming out as a TV show, I believe, on HBO Max. Don't quote me on that.
I think it's Apple TV.
Okay, Apple TV, right?
Maybe.
One of those.
It's one of the weird ones. It's not HBO Max.
Yeah, what is it? It was like psychohistory, which is basically mathematics as a social science, right? Predicting the future with very accurate results. Yeah, psychohistory. That's going to be interesting because, again, if you get enough data points, can you predict the future, right? And what does that say about free will of individuals? Yeah, interesting stuff. Any other things before we close the doors and, reflect on our discussion of scientists in science fiction?
Well, I would just like to thank you guys for hosting Raoul's little snippet of Afterlife Crisis. It was a heck of a lot of fun for me to have that recorded, and a blast to have it featured on the podcast. So thank you very much for indulging me again.
Oh, no problem.
That was great. I really enjoyed that, and it's a treat. And we definitely, on this pub, support creative endeavors. So good on you, Randall. Good job.
Everybody drink.
Drink.
Did.
Cheers.
All right, then. So let's close the doors. This show is officially a podcast and on YouTube. Generally, it gets up to YouTube the day or 2 days after it goes out as a podcast. Subscribe today. Check out our Discord channel. Basically, it's a source of news and discussion. You can find the Discord server invites on our social media. Speaking of which, we're on social media. I do the Twitter and the Instagram, and Derek does the Facebook. Derek, you're doing a great job on the Facebook.
Thanks. I'm having trouble with the Parler account, though. It's not working.
Shut up. Oh, no. Dear Lord. And we're not on Gab or any of these non-mainstream platforms. Oh, God. If you want to look for our Twitter account, it's at SciFi Pubcast. Basically, SciFi Pubcast. Google it. You hit all the social media that way. And let's see. You can even find our email. Our email is management@scifipubcast.space. That's right. Twitter, Twitter? Yeah. Carrie, what's your Twitter address?
My Twitter handle is Carrie Blackfire42. That's Keri Blackfire42.
And what other podcasts are you on?
I'm on DC Talk, which is a DC Comics TV movie news and discussion show. I'm on Cape Chronicles, which is a review of superhero movies in chronological release order. And I'm also on Enter the Dojo, which is a martial arts TV and film review show.
Okay, cool. And these shows are on the
Random Chatter Network. Yes.
Random Chatter Network. Excellent. Derek, what's your Twitter address?
I am at Derek J. Beebe, and I didn't lose any followers in the big Twitter culling this week.
There you go. Because how many followers? Don't forget. Okay.
I stayed at 10.
Okay. Yeah, follow Derek. You need some followers. Okay. Randall, sir. First thing, thank you so much for your special treat for this episode. It's greatly appreciated. Where can people find you on Twitter?
I am at Randal_Graham. That's Randal with one L _Graham. No relation to Lindsay.
There you go. Right. Yes, author of Before Life and Afterlife Crisis.
Cheers.
Cheers. Drink. Any timetable about when the third book is going to come out?
Yeah, it's due at the publishers in July. I'm about halfway done. Still ticking along, writing feverishly, and having a good time doing it.
Fantastic. Good to hear. And my Twitter address is at Joel_Welch. WELCH, just like the grape juice. That's it, guys. Folks out there, please take care in these interesting times. Make it home safe. We'll see you next time. Bye now.
Wear a mask.
It was an interesting times.
Bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye now.
Music provided courtesy of Logan Rathbone. Podcast logo by Jea Rhea. Copyrighted Joe Welch. Listen responsibly, and we can't wait for your next visit to our fine establishment. Cheers.